Compliance is all about ensuring that you're doing what you say you're doing or what you should be doing based on what somebody else is assuming or believing. So in order to fight the good fight and achieve and maintain this compliance, there's a lot to do, easily a dozen or more things. And the ones that I've listed here on this slide are the key areas that we've got to focus on. We've got system monitoring, obviously seeing what's going on, who's doing what, and hopefully protecting it in real time. Patch management, change management, actually monitoring who's making changes, especially on critical servers and hosts that you can't afford to have down. Security testing, who's doing your security scanning? How is it being done? How often is it being done? Software licensing, something that people often overlook, but we have this whole issue with the software police threatening to come in and levy large fines against people who are abusing software licenses. Backup and recovery, application and database management and security, server security, workstation security, handheld devices, network infrastructure security, and finally user education. So how is anybody in IT realistically supposed to keep up with this? Especially if they're doing it manually. The reality is that the people that are trying to do all of these things are not really doing any of them very well. And a large part of this is about taking protocol standards and best practices and applying them to the configurations of your systems. And once you gain control of your system configurations, you can actually pull all this together. You can help compliance, you can help enforce compliance and maintain compliance. And that's going to lead to reasonable endpoint security. So with endpoint technologies and these endpoint security applications, you can map your configurations to well-known standards, things like the Security Content Automation Protocol put out by NIST, the CIS benchmarks at cisecurity.org, and even the military standards. There's also some best practices and I guess you could call them requirements of PCI, HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, Sarbanes-Oxley, all of these regulations that we're up against. You can literally take their requirements and snap them into your environment. And then the endpoint protection is actually going to enforce them automatically. So I've seen a lot of medium and larger size organizations where multiple people are responsible for compliance. And getting back to the whole siloed security and disparate management deal, when you got multiple hands in the pie, you're opening yourself up for trouble, especially when people aren't talking to each other. You've got one team and one manager believing that their area is compliant, but that may not mean that the business as a whole is compliant. So nobody's talking to anyone else, and therein lies the business risk. In order to make all this happen, with current technologies, we now have a way to create sustainable and repeatable processes to close that infamous change management loop and help minimize business risk long term. So in order to do this, you need to incorporate the security lifecycle that facilitates compliance, and that's what I have listed on this slide. That is, assess, figure out where you're vulnerable, resolve and remediate the issues, proactively monitor and then control and enforce your policies, test for compliance again, and then circle back around and repeat that entire process. That's how you're going to achieve and maintain compliance. Remember that compliant doesn't mean secure. Just because you deploy a solution that supports your own policies or the policies and requirements of the HIPAAs and SOXs of the world, it doesn't mean that your organization is secure. Be careful with this whole compliance mindset. I see a lot of endpoint security solutions being purchased and justified in the name of compliance. I don't agree with that. I think it can be bad for business. I actually think compliance should be a nice side benefit of an otherwise well-run information security program. So endpoint compliance not only minimizes business risks, it keeps losing business altogether, plus it can help you with your overall IT governance. And on this slide here, I've listed out some of the benefits. Obviously, help you keep current with laws and regulations, government regs, industry regs, state breach notification laws, software licensing, what have you. It enables authorized software and media use and actually facilitates that instead of getting in the way of that like security has been a lot in the past. Facilitates the use of the technology. Helps drive costs down and out. Compliance costs associated with bringing in more personnel, with figuring out how to juggle all the requirements from the different regulations and things like that. Probably one of the biggest things that I've seen is reduced duplication of efforts, because you have so many of these silos, all these different departments doing their own thing, and if you pull this all together with the right endpoint security solution, you can help reduce that duplication of effort and justify the investment. And then finally, you get actionable information that people can use. This really comes in handy when it comes to audits or security breach investigations, even for business partners or customers, to share with them, look, hey, we are doing what we say we're doing. We're staying on top of this, and we're doing what's right for the business and what's right for everyone involved. Overall, the compliance technologies, they can remain vigilant even when you can't be.
Why is there such a disconnect between how management views the state of info security and the realities of what's actually going on?
I think they're too busy trying to run the business, and they don't see security as a major driver, as a competitive differentiator, as a means of creating trouble for the business. They think, well, it's those ITs, those techie folks, the security issues that we don't really need to worry about. So that's what's leading a lot of it. And then you have IT and security folks who don't know how to sell security to upper management,
right,
who don't know how to get people on board, who don't know how to approach it the right way, who don't know how to talk to managers on their level in the context of what's good for the business.
Kevin, one of the biggest roadblocks to endpoint security is network managers and compliance officers trying to juggle being compliant with all the different laws and regulations. Does it make sense to address every regulation separately, or try and reach a middle ground to minimize the work involved?
I've actually seen people trying to juggle HIPAA by itself, and then trying to juggle Gramm-Leach-Bliley, and then here comes PCI, and they're trying to do all this stuff and juggle them all by themselves, and they're not doing anything quite right. The thing is, if you develop a set of standards and best practices, be it the ISO 27002, whatever set of standards and best practices that you want to adopt and incorporate, do it at the highest level possible, and if you do it at that level, you're going to be compliant with everything else. PCI is going to be okay, HIPAA is going to be okay, Sarbanes-Oxley is going to be okay. So focus on security best practices at as high a level as possible within the organization, and I think you'll be fine doing it that way.
One more question. What's the biggest problem you're seeing related to compliance?
Believing that compliance equals security. You get a HIPAA audit, or you get a Gramm-Leach-Bliley audit, or we pass this PCI assessment, or we did our self-assessment for PCI, therefore we're secure. That's absolutely untrue. It's a false sense of security. Compliant, yeah, you say you have policies, you say you have passwords, yeah, your web application may be locked down from the elements, and your endpoints may be secure from all the malware and data protection or data issues, things of that nature. But the fact of the matter is, if you're not testing them, if you're not trying to actually break in and exploit these vulnerabilities and potential vulnerabilities, there's no way to know for sure. And in most cases that I'm seeing a lot of organizations that are compliant, but yet they can still be hacked from the inside and from the outside.
Great. Thanks, Kevin.
You're welcome.
And thanks to you for joining us today. Feel free to submit a question to Kevin, and that's it. Thank you so much, and have a great week.